There's a moment, most people will never experience it, but there is a moment, in the middle of the night, when you wake up and you know, without seeing anything, without hearing anything, you just know that something in the room has changed. Not the temperature, not the light, something deeper than that. Something that reaches past your eyes and your ears and lands directly in the oldest part of your brain, part that was built before language, for reason, part that kept your ancestors alive in the dark. Part of you doesn't speak in words, it speaks in dread. Marcus and Diane Freely bought their house in the spring 2009. Two-story colonial on a quiet cul-de-sac, eastern Pennsylvania. 4 bedrooms, finished basement, backyard that backed up against the thin tree line. It was everything they had worked. And for 8 months, it was exactly that. Then, something changed. By the time it was over, by the time Marcus and Diane finally left that house, they would not speak about what happened inside of it for nearly 2 years. Not to friends, not to family, not even to each other. What I'm about to tell you, their account, reconstructed, hours of recorded conversations, personal journal entries Diane kept during the worst part of it, and a single recorded audio file Marcus made on his phone at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, February. Recording he almost deleted more than a dozen times before finally deciding that the world needed to hear it. I want to be honest with you before we go any further. This story did not resolve cleanly. There was no priest who came and fixed everything. There was no single dramatic night where the thing was confronted and defeated. What happened to Marcus and Diane? Slow erosion. Wearing down of certainty, safety, the basic human belief that the place where you sleep is yours. Wasn't. I'm Tim Rose. This is hashtag paranormal. Marcus was 34 when they moved in. Diane was 32. They'd been together 7 years. Married for 2. No children. Not yet. Though Diane had mentioned in one of our conversations they'd been talking about starting a family. That detail matters. So hold on. The house had one previous owner, an older woman named Harriet Voss, who'd lived there alone for 11 years before passing away in a hospice. It was about 20 or so miles from the property. Didn't die in the house. The realtor made a point of telling them that, which Marcus found slightly odd at the time. The specificity of it, the fact that it was mentioned at all, kind of bothered Mark. He didn't think much of it then. First 8 months in the home were normal in the way that new homes are normal. There were things to fix, things to paint, boxes that never quite got fully unpacked. Diane had set up a reading room in the corner of the upstairs guest room. Marcus converted the basement into a workspace. Long table, good lighting, secondhand couch for when projects ran late. They had people over. They had dinners. Had arguments about furniture. And they made up over take up in the living room. Normal. First thing Marcus noticed, and he is careful to frame it this way, as something he noticed rather than something that happened, was the basement. Specifically, the way the basement felt at certain times of the day. Not all the time, not even most of the time. But there were afternoons, late afternoons, when the light outside was going gold, the rest of the house felt warm, and he would be sitting at his work table. He would become suddenly, acutely aware that he wasn't comfortable down there. He wasn't scared. He's careful about that distinction too. Just not comfortable. Wearing a shirt that fits wrong. You can ignore it and work through it, but it's there. He started leaving the basement, and he began to leave the door open at the top of the stairs. He told himself that it was for airflow. Diane noticed the door being open. She didn't say anything for a while. She thought he was just airing the place out. It was months before they compared notes on it. Because Diane had her own thing. Diane's the mirror. There was a full-length mirror at the end of the upstairs hallway. Tall, wooden frame, slightly tarnished at the edges. It had come with the home. One of the few things Harriet Voss left behind. The realtor had offered to have it removed. Diane said no. She had liked it. She said it made the hallway feel longer, more elegant. She stopped saying that around month 7. Started small, the way these things always do. She would pass the mirror at night, going from the bedroom to the bathroom. The normal middle of the night routine. She would feel very briefly what she saw in the mirror was a half second behind her. Not dramatically, not in a way she could prove or even fully articulate. It's a sensation, a half second of wrongness, like a video where the audio barely out of sync. She started taking a different route to the bathroom, going around, through the bedroom, a long way, past the window, adding 40 seconds to a 30-second trip. She didn't tell Marcus. She wrote it in her journal. And I want to read this to you directly because her words matter. She wrote, "No, it's nothing. No, it's just the way old mirrors work. Silver backing, going uneven. The way your brain fills in the gaps when you're half asleep. I know all of that, but knowing it doesn't stop the feeling. The feeling is this. But the thing in the mirror is not me. That it's something wearing me. And if I stare long enough, I'll stop pretending." She wrote that in November. By December, she had stopped going upstairs alone after dark. I want to take a moment here to talk about something that I think gets overlooked in these kinds of stories. We spend a lot of time focused on the dramatic events, things that are easy to describe, things that photographs, so to speak. But the more I've sat with Marcus and Diane's account, the more I believe the most important thing that happened to them wasn't any single event, it was the accumulation. It was the way that living in a house, something that doesn't want you there, begins to reshape the way you move. The way you move through your own space, the way you start editing your behavior, slowly, without noticing, until one day you realize that you've reorganized your entire life around avoiding certain rooms, certain times of the day, certain angles of your own home. And by then, you're already losing. December was the first month that Marcus and Diane both independently described as feeling wrong. Not specific incidents, not yet. Just quality in the air in the house. Kind of heaviness that wasn't there before. Diane described it as the feeling of walking into a room where two people have just had a terrible argument. That charge, that residue. There was no argument. The house was quiet. Marcus started working later. Not because he had more work. I'll tell you that plainly. He started working later because going to bed felt like a decision that he didn't want to make. Because bedroom, which had always been neutral, which had always just been the room where they slept, it started to feel like a destination. Somewhere he was going to, rather than just going. That's a subtle thing. I know it sounds subtle. Think about your own bedroom for a moment. Think about how instinctively, thoughtlessly, walk into it every night. How it requires no emotional preparation, but it's just the next room. Now imagine it stops feeling like that. Imagine that somewhere in the hallway, in the doorway, something in you begins to brace. That was December. First concrete incident happened on December 19th. Marcus knows the date because it was 4 days before they were supposed to drive to his parents' house for the holiday. He remembers thinking, immediate aftermath, that he wouldn't tell his family what had just happened to him. He had been in the basement working. It was late, a little past midnight. Diane was already asleep upstairs. The house was silent in the specific way the houses are silent. Everyone else is sleeping, and you're the only one still awake. He was at his table, headphones on, deep in something that he can't remember, when he became aware that the couch behind him was occupied. Through sound, not through movement, through the same instinct we talked about at the beginning. That oldest part of the brain. Someone, something, was sitting on the couch. Took his headphones off. He didn't turn around immediately. He sat very still, the way prey animals sit still. And he listened. Nothing. No sound, no breathing, no shift of weight on the cushions. He turned around. The couch was empty. Sat there for a long time looking at it. Couch he had just picked up for $40 in the estate sale. Couch where he'd fallen asleep dozens of times. His laptop balanced on his chest. Perfectly, completely, ordinarily empty couch. He went upstairs, got into bed, didn't sleep. At some point in the early hours of the morning, Diane reached over in the dark, took his hand. She didn't say anything. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just held his hand. And later, she told me I knew something had happened. Didn't know what. I knew he needed not to be alone in it. So I just held on. They didn't talk about it that morning. They made coffee, made eggs. They drove to Marcus' parents' house. Spent 4 days being entirely normal. People with entirely normal lives. But something had shifted. Threshold had been crossed and uncrossed. January came back cold. Came home from the holidays. The house greeted them the way a house does. Particular smell of it. Particular temperature. Geography of familiar rooms. Marcus said something to me that I kept coming back to. He said, it felt like it had been waiting. Not a dramatic statement. He said it quietly, almost offhandedly. He was commenting on weather. But when I asked him to explain what he meant, what that felt like, what he thought for a long time before he answered, he said, you know how a dog acts when you come home? How it's been there all day, alone. When you walk in, there's all this energy, all this accumulated waiting that gets released the second you're through the door. Felt like that, the opposite. Something had been there all day, alone, and walked in, noticed. It was glad. I want you to sit with that for a moment. The idea something was glad you came home. Not welcoming, not warm, glad. The way a predator is glad. Glad when something wanders back into its territory. January escalated in a way that feels, in retrospect, almost structured, almost deliberate. As if whatever was in that house understood the value of incremental pressure. As if it knew that if it showed everything at once, they would leave. That if it turned the dial up slowly, little at a time, keep them there. Keep them inside. Sound started in mid-January. Not loud, not dramatic, nothing you record on a phone. Playback for a skeptic. All things. Selling Creek from the second floor. No one was upstairs. Diane heard it first. The kitchen. Mid-afternoon. She stopped what she was doing and she stood very still and listened. The way you do. And then told herself it's the house contracting in the cold. Houses do that. Then Marcus heard it. Same creek. Different day. He was in the living room It came from directly above him, the guest room, Diane's reading corner. He went upstairs and checked, found nothing. Nothing moved, nothing disturbed. The room felt occupied. This is the part of the story where I want to be careful, because I know there are listeners right now running through the rational explanations: old house, winter, traction, pipes, animals in the wall. I ran through all of those too. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that none of those things are possible. I am going to tell you what Diane told me about the reading corner anyway. She had stopped going in there the second week of the month. Not because of the creek. The creek came later. She had stopped going in there because of the chair. A reading chair. Deep armchair. Green. Positioned to face the window. On 2 separate mornings, been facing the door. As soon as she woke up, facing the door. Not dramatically, repositioned, not thrown across the room, rotated, maybe 90 degrees, facing out toward the hallway, and then toward the window. First time, she turned it back, told Marcus she must have moved it herself without noticing. Second time, she closed the door to that room, didn't open it again for 6 weeks. Marcus didn't argue with her about it. He'd stopped spending time in the basement by then. They were both pulling inward, attracting toward the center of the house, without acknowledging to each other that that was what they were doing. Ceding space, giving ground. The house was becoming smaller. I want to stop here for a moment, because I think there's something important in what Marcus and Diane, rather in what they weren't doing. They weren't talking to each other. Not about the real thing. Talked around it. They mentioned individual incidents in neutral tones. The chair was moved again, and they accepted each other's silence as acknowledgement. They built a shared language of avoidance without ever having to say the same thing directly. Think about why that is. And I think because naming it makes it real. As long as it was a series of isolated, slightly odd incidents, they could each, privately, maintain the possibility of a rational explanation. The moment you sit down with your partner, you say, I think something in this house, I think something is not good. Can't go back to the rational explanation. Committed. Committed to the reality of it. The reality of it means you have to decide what to do. I think Marcus and Diane were afraid of what that decision would bring. Because they were weak, not because they were foolish, because that decision, we need to leave our home, one of the most psychologically violent things a person can have to face. This house was not just a building to them. It was the accumulation of their labor, their plans, future. Something threatening all of that. They were not ready to let it. So they contracted. They stayed quiet. And the thing in the house, patient as it had always been, waited. February is when it stopped being subtle. I'll tell you about the night of February 6th in detail, because Marcus remembers it in detail, with a clarity that he describes as almost unnatural. Like the memory was etched rather than recorded, because it represents the moment that the thing in their house changed its approach. Whatever patience it had shown in the fall and the winter was on this night abandoned. Marcus and Diane had gone to bed at around 11, normal night. They'd watched something on television, nothing too memorable, gone upstairs and gotten into bed and out the light. Diane fell asleep first. She usually did. Marcus lay there awake for a while. Been sleeping poorly for weeks by then. Eventually drifted off sometime after midnight. Woke up at 2:47 a.m. He knows the time because his phone was on the nightstand. Looked at it immediately. Instinct. Way you check a clock when something wakes you. Trying to orient yourself. 2:47. The room was dark. The house was quiet. And someone standing in the corner. Not a shape. Not a trick of a shadow. Someone. Figure. Dark. Human in proportion. Not in quality. Marcus uses that word specifically. Quality. Standing in the far corner of the bedroom, between the dresser and the wall. Still. Not moving. Making a sound. Still. Marcus didn't move. He lay in bed, looked at the corner. He understood. Certainty. Bypassed all of his rational facilities. Whatever was standing there, aware of him. Watching. Possibly been watching him for some time. Reached for Diane without looking away from the corner. He shook her shoulder. She made a sound. Irritated, half-conscious sound. Someone being up from deep sleep. He shook her again, harder. She sat up. Pointed at the corner. Diane, not yet fully woken up, who was still oriented somewhere between sleep and waking, looked at the corner. Went completely still. They sat like that, two of them, in their own bed, own room, looking at the corner of their bedroom. What Marcus estimates was between 2 and 4 minutes. Not sure, time had gone strange. And then Diane said very quietly, Marcus reached for the bedside lamp. The figure was gone. Empty. Familiar geometry of the dresser, the wall, and the coat Marcus had hung on the back of the closet door. Soft orange glow of the streetlight through the curtains. Empty. They did not go back to sleep that night. They sat up in bed, every light in the room on, and they talked. First time really talked about what had been happening since December. Since before December, since they'd moved in. All of it came. Couch in the basement, mirror in the hallway, chair in the reading room, sounds from the guest room, feeling of being watched, feeling of dread at the bottom of the stairs, the way the house felt like it was changing shape, slowly, room by room. Marcus told me it was almost a relief. Finally say it out loud. Have her look at me and not think I was crazy. No, what she had been living with inside, same thing I'd been living with inside, had been just as afraid to name it. Diane said the worst part, realizing how long we'd each been alone in it, right next to it, each other, same house, carrying the same fear. Neither of us said a word. They decided that night to call someone. Didn't know who exactly. They weren't religious. They didn't have a paranormal investigator on speed dial. They agreed that what was happening in their house, beyond what they could manage alone, that they needed help. They did not know as they sat there in the bedroom waiting for morning. The worst part still hid. The week between February 6th and February 13th, the most documented part of Marcus and Diane's experience. Partly because they were now actively paying attention, cataloging, trying to build a record. Partly because of the activity had increased to a frequency, made documentation almost involuntary. Things were happening. Sounds from the guest room intensified, no longer just a creak, now a rhythmic sound, something pacing back and forth, measured, patient. Diane stood outside the closed door one afternoon, listened to it for 3 full minutes before walking away. Mirror in the hallway, one Diane had been avoiding for months, cracked February 8th. Single diagonal fracture, clean and sharp, upper left corner, lower right. No impact, no explanation. Marcus wrapped it in a sheet, carried it to the garage. That night, they both heard what sounded like the sheet. Didn't go to the garage to check. February 10th, Diane was alone in the house. Marcus was out, mid-afternoon grocery. She heard her name. Out from a room, out from a specific direction, everywhere at once. Single syllable. Her name, spoken in a voice that she described almost my own voice. Not quite. Someone had listened to me speak and then tried to reproduce it, gotten it almost right. She left the house immediately, sat in the driveway until Marcus came home. When he pulled up and saw her sitting on the front step in the cold, he didn't ask questions. He sat down next to her, gave her the grocery bag to hold, something physical, something to hold on to, waited until she was ready to talk. That detail, Marcus handing her the grocery bag, stayed with me. Such a human thing, such a tender, instinctive thing, in the middle of something inexplicable, terrifying, the act of giving someone something real to hold. Didn't fix anything, but it wasn't nothing either. February 11th, Marcus made the recording. I mentioned it at the beginning. The audio file he nearly deleted a dozen times. He made it at 3 a.m., sitting in the kitchen, the lights on. But something had woken him again. He couldn't go back to sleep. He needed to do something with his hand. Something that felt like action, like agency. So he opened his phone and hit record. And he talked. I'm not going to play the recording here. Marcus asked me not to. He shared it with me in confidence. I respect it. I respect that boundary. I will tell you what he said on it. Talked about the figure in the corner, and about the sounds from the upstairs, about the voice that called Diane's name in her own voice, about the way the house felt now. Not just haunted, he said. Hostile. Actively hostile. Something that had decided they needed to go. And then he said something that I think is the most important thing in the entire account. He said, the scariest part isn't the things I see, isn't the sounds or feeling, or any of that. The scariest part, I'm starting to feel like maybe we don't belong here. Maybe we never did. I don't know if that thought is mine, something put it there. I want you to think about that idea, your own doubt, your own creeping sense of defeat might not be yours. That something could be operating just on its own, your environment, just on your senses, but on your will. Part of you that decides to stay or leave, decides to fight, surrender. That's true. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying Marcus believed any of it. And what they were facing wasn't just a presence, strategy. It was working. Valentine's Day, February 14th. I want to acknowledge the irony of that, because Marcus certainly has. He's mentioned it with a dark, humorless laugh. Both of our conversations. The most romantic day of the calendar year. Tried to have a normal evening. Made dinner at home. Diane had cooked. Marcus opened a bottle of wine. Put on music. They tried to be two ordinary people, having an ordinary evening in their home. 2 hours. I almost managed it. Almost. Went to bed around midnight. Left one lamp on. They've been doing that since February 6th, leaving a light on in the room. Small concession to fear that they'd never discussed, both silently agreed to. Diane had fallen asleep. Marcus was laying there awake. He told me he'd been lying there about an hour, staring at the ceiling, just listening to the house. Doing the inventory that had become his nightly ritual, cataloging sounds, waiting for something. At approximately 1 in the morning, the lamp went out. Not the bulb burning out, not a powerful flicker. He knows this because the digital clock on the nightstand stayed lit. It's the lamp. Off. Marcus lay completely still. In the dark from the corner, same corner, heard a sound. Not a creak, a voice, not footsteps this time, breathing. Slow, deliberate, rhythmic breathing. In the corner of the room, nothing stood. Nothing could be standing, because there was nothing there. They were alone in the house. They were always alone. Then the breathing changed. It slowed down, and it formed something. Not a word. Marcus is careful about this. Not a word. Almost a word. Sound with weight, tension behind. Sound that pressed against the air in the room, filled the silence, clearly, undeniably, purposefully directed at him. Diane woke up. Not because Marcus touched her, because he called her name, woke up on her own, sat upright, and looked at the corner. They both sat there in the dark, lamp out, clock glowing, breathing in the corner. Neither of them moved. Then Diane said one thing. She said, "We're leaving." Not a question, not a suggestion, a statement. Marcus said, "No." Got out of bed, got dressed, took their phones and their keys and their coats. They walked out of the bedroom, down the stairs, through the front door. They sat in the car in the driveway, 1 in the morning on Valentine's. They drove to a hotel. Didn't pack. They didn't take anything. They didn't look back at the house as they pulled off from the driveway. Never went back to sleep in that house again. Practical aftermath of what happened to Marcus and Diane was they stayed in the hotel for 4 days. They arranged for a moving company to pack and remove all their belongings. They weren't present for any of it. Gave the movers a key, waited at a coffee shop 3 miles away. Marcus could not explain this to the moving company. Paid extra. They broke their mortgage. Cost them. Financial details aren't mine to share. Marcus was direct about the fact that leaving the way they lived, the timeline that they lived, expensive. Significantly expensive. Paid it without. They rented an apartment across town, ground floor, lots of windows. 2 other units in the building. Wanted neighbors. Wanted proximity to other people. The way they hadn't before. First time in several months, they slept with the light on. Diane still doesn't have a full-length mirror in her home. She said this to me in a tone that suggested she doesn't intend to change that ever. There are things you give up after an experience like that. Small concessions, what you've learned about what the world can do. But this, Marcus has not set up a basement workspace in any home since. Works in the kitchen table. Neither of them talk about it. Notice this when speaking with them. I didn't ask about it directly. They weren't talking about children anymore. Some things aren't mine to excavate, but I noticed it. But I will tell you what Diane said at the end of our final conversation. She said, I don't think about it the way I used to. I used to try to understand it, what it was, why it was there, what it wanted. I used to go over it and over it, try to find an explanation that could file away somewhere. I don't do that anymore. Accepted that I won't understand it, but understanding it was never on the offer. The only thing on offer was leaving. We waited too long to do that. Sorry we did. But we got out. Some nights, that feels like. I sat with that for a long time. Long time after I did it. The idea that survival is sometimes the whole story. But there is no understanding to be achieved. No lessons to be extracted. Sometimes the only real thing is the fact of having gotten out. Having gotten out together. Marcus and Diane Freely still live in that apartment across town. They've been there for 4 years now. Still together. Something I want to name explicitly, because these kinds of experiences have a way of breaking people apart. They didn't let it do that. Colonial on the cul-de-sac sold twice in 2 years after they left. I'm not going to tell you what the current residents say about it. Some things, find for yourself if you want to. Look. Some things, better left alone. Thought a lot about what Marcus said on that recording. About not knowing whether his doubt was his own, whether something had placed it there. I think that's the most disturbing question at the center of this story. Not what the entity was, where it came from. Not why that house. Those are all interesting questions. The one that keeps me up, one that stays, question of agency. Assume that our thoughts are ours. Fears, our doubts, our impulse to stay or go, come from inside us, belong to us, answer only to us. What if something can reach into that space? What if the architecture of dread built up inside Marcus and Diane over those months wasn't just a side effect of what they were experiencing? Point. What if the thing in that house wasn't primarily interested in felt a particular way that changes you? A way that 4 years later, you still sleep with a light on. I don't have an answer to that. I don't think I'm supposed to. But I know Marcus and Diane are still here, still together, still building a life, carefully. A home where the corners stay empty, mirrors behave, and lamps stay on when you need them to. That's not nothing. That's everything. This is the Freely story. What's yours?
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more.